Some crimes leave behind more questions than answers, and some mysteries never truly end. Our story tonight takes us back to the spring of 1980 in Anaheim, California. Dorothy Jane Scott was a 32-year-old single mother working as a secretary for a local business. Friends and colleagues described her as gentle, dependable, and quietly kind. She lived with her 4-year-old son, Sean, and her parents often helped raise the boy while Dorothy worked long hours. But even as life seemed steady and normal on the outside, Dorothy had been hiding something disturbing. For months leading up to her disappearance, Dorothy confided in friends and family about receiving strange phone calls. At first, they were simply odd, heavy breathing, long silences, then a sudden hang-up. But over time, the calls grew darker. The man on the line claimed to be watching her. Sometimes he described what she was wearing that day. Sometimes he threatened to kill her. Dorothy's parents recalled her saying the voice was one she recognized, but she could never quite place it. He would say, "You're my destiny." Other times, he'd tell her he was going to kill her. She was frightened, but she never showed it at work. Only to us. Those were the words of her father, Jacob Scott. Dorothy even told a coworker that she had started considering carrying a handgun, but she never followed through. The calls continued. The fear continued. And then, one night, everything changed. May 28th, 1980. The last night Dorothy Jane Scott would ever be seen alive. On the evening of May 28th, Dorothy attended a work-related meeting. Her day had been ordinary, quiet, steady, unremarkable. She wore a long black scarf, a white blouse, and her signature black frame glasses. Friends said she seemed relaxed that day, though perhaps a little distracted. The meeting wrapped up around 9 p.m., but one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostron, wasn't feeling well. His arm was swollen, painful, a spider bite, it seemed. Dorothy, always the caretaker, offered to drive him to the UCI Medical Center in Orange. Another co-worker, Pam Head, decided to ride along. So the three of them left the meeting together, driving Dorothy's white Toyota station wagon into the warm California night. At the hospital, doctors confirmed it was indeed a spider bite. They gave Conrad treatment and pain medication. While waiting, Pam sat beside him. Dorothy, meanwhile, moved in and out of the waiting area, checking in, making calls, fetching things for her friends. Nothing seemed out of place. Not yet. Around midnight, Conrad was cleared to leave. Pam and Conrad headed outside into the hospital parking lot. Dorothy told them she'd go grab the car from where it was parked and circle back to pick them up at the entrance. It was a small kindness, a simple gesture, but it was the last time her friends ever saw her face. Dorothy's car headlights flashed in the lot. She pulled away. Her friends waited outside the entrance, expecting her to swing around in a minute or two. But minutes passed, then more minutes, and soon it was clear something was wrong. Suddenly, her Toyota reappeared, speeding. Headlights blazed, the car tearing out of the hospital lot at full speed. Pam and Conrad weaved, confused, but the car didn't stop, didn't slow down,
didn't turn. It roared past them and vanished into the darkness. At first, they thought maybe Dorothy had some emergency with her son, or maybe panic had overtaken her. The phone calls, the threats finally becoming too much. But then, the hours kept dragging on, and Dorothy never came home. Her parents woke to an empty house. Her young son still slept peacefully in his bed, but Dorothy's place at the table was empty. By dawn, they reported her missing, and by dawn, police had a new problem because Dorothy's car had been found. Dorothy's car headlights flashed in the lot. She pulled away. Her friends waited outside the entrance, expecting her to swing around in a minute or two. But minutes passed, then more minutes, and soon it was clear something was wrong. Suddenly, her Toyota reappeared, speeding. Headlights blazed, the car tearing out of the hospital lot at full speed. Pan and Conrad weaved, confused, but the car didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't turn. It roared past them and vanished into the darkness. At first, they thought maybe Dorothy had some emergency with her son, or maybe panic had overtaken her. The phone calls, the threats finally becoming too much. But then, the hours kept dragging on, and Dorothy never came home. Her parents woke to an empty house. Her young son still slept peacefully in his bed, but Dorothy's place at the table was empty. By dawn, they reported her missing, and by dawn, police had a new problem because Dorothy's car had been found.
At 4:30 that morning, just a few hours after Dorothy vanished from the hospital parking lot, police discovered something chilling. Her white Toyota station wagon sat abandoned in an alley in Santa Ana, about 10 miles from the hospital. The car was still smoldering. Flames had licked across the interior, charred the seats, blackened the glass. Whoever had left it there had tried to erase something. But there was no Dorothy. No body, no signs of a struggle inside the car. Just the burned shell of the vehicle, standing like a tombstone at the edge of dawn. Investigators immediately knew this wasn't a simple disappearance. Dorothy's behavior at the hospital had been normal, calm, composed. She hadn't seemed afraid, hadn't confided in Pam or Conrad about any looming threat. And yet, the phone calls, the warnings, the man who said he would get her. Now the threat had taken shape, and that's when the real torment began. Because in the days and weeks after Dorothy vanished, the phone rang again. At the Scott family home, the caller returned. Each time it was the same man, the same cold, taunting voice. He asked if Dorothy was home. He told her parents he had her. Sometimes he confessed love. Other times he promised pain.
Police tried to trace the calls, but the man was cunning. He only dialed late at night, when Vera Scott, Dorothy's mother, was alone in the house. He seemed to know her schedule, her movements, even her emotional breaking points. For years, not weeks, not months, but years, the calls continued. the phantom voice weaving itself deeper into the family's life, refusing to let them find peace. And somewhere in that terrible silence, Dorothy herself was still missing. Imagine this. Every night the phone rings. Sometimes it's just silence. Sometimes it's laughter. Other times it's a voice that knows your daughter's name and swears he'll never let her go. This was the reality for Dorothy's parents. Jacob and Vera Scott lived under siege. Their home was no longer safe. It had become a stage for a phantom tormentor. Vera, in particular, bore the weight of the calls. The man never spoke to Jacob, only her. It was as if he wanted to isolate her, to twist her grief tighter, to keep Dorothy alive and dead at the same time. The voice would sometimes whisper, "Is Dorothy there?" Or, chillingly, "I've got her."
Police tried to intervene. They tapped the Scott family's phone. They advised Vera on how to keep the man talking long enough for a trace. But he was cunning. He always hung up just seconds before they could lock him down. To the Scotts, it felt like the caller was mocking them and mocking the very system designed to protect them. Meanwhile, investigators turned to the people who had been closest to Dorothy. They looked at coworkers, friends, neighbors. Was there someone quietly obsessed with her? Pam Head, Dorothy's friend and the last to see her alive, told police she had never noticed anyone suspicious. Dorothy had been private, quiet, more focused on raising her son than dating. But that quiet life may have drawn someone in even more deeply. Someone who mistook silence for availability, kindness for invitation. The police had theories. One possible suspect was a coworker of Dorothy's at the shop where she worked. He was said to have been infatuated with her, though never directly aggressive. Some officers wondered if his fascination had taken a darker turn, but no charges were ever filed. Others speculated the caller was someone Dorothy had crossed paths with, casually, maybe at the shop, maybe in her neighborhood, someone who would build up an entire fantasy around her. But again, no hard evidence. For the Scotts, the torment stretched on for years. The phone kept ringing, the voice kept haunting, and with every unanswered question, the case grew colder.
And then, nearly 4 years later, there was finally a discovery, one that would change everything. But it would not bring peace. It would only deepen the mystery. It was August of 1984. More than 4 years had passed since Dorothy Jane Scott vanished into the night. By now, most in Anaheim assumed the case had gone cold. Dorothy's parents still received the calls, still clutched the phone with trembling hands, but no answers had come. And then, by chance, the earth gave one up. A construction crew working in Anaheim Hills began clearing ground for new development. The sun was high, the air dry. That's when one of the workers stopped. His shovel had struck something brittle. At first, he thought it was animal remains, a common find in the rolling hills of Southern California. But as he brushed away the soil, he realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was bone.
human bone. And not just one piece. Soon more fragments appeared. A skull, ribs, a pelvis. The authorities were called. The area was sealed, and as forensic teams combed the site, the truth emerged. The remains belonged to a young woman.
Alongside the bones, they found something else, a dog's remains. Some believed it was Dorothy's own dog, though this was never confirmed. But the most chilling detail was that Dorothy's jewelry was still there. A turquoise ring, a watch, silent witnesses buried with her for 4 long years. The coroner could not determine the precise cause of death. Too much time had passed. Too much of her body had been reclaimed by the earth. But what they could confirm was this: the remains were Dorothy's. The Scott family's worst fears had finally materialized. Their daughter was not missing. She was gone. And yet, with this discovery came no relief, only more questions. How had Dorothy ended up here? Had she been killed the very night she vanished, or kept alive for a time? Who had chosen this lonely hillside as her grave? And most haunting of all, if Dorothy had been dead for years, then who had been calling her parents? The police renewed their efforts. They re-examined old suspects. They interviewed new ones. But the years had eroded leads, washed away traces, left only fragments of possibility. For the Scotts, the discovery meant only that their torment shifted form. No longer the uncertainty of whether Dorothy was alive, but now the certainty of her death, coupled with the cruel knowledge that the killer, the caller, was still out there. And still the phone would not stop ringing. Even after her remains were found, even after her parents had laid flowers at her grave, the man on the other end of the line continued to whisper, continued to laugh, continued to remind them that their daughter's story was not yet over. For most families of the missing, the discovery of remains brings a terrible kind of closure. The door to uncertainty closes, and grief at last has a shape. But for Jacob and Vera Scott, Dorothy's parents, there was no such peace, because even after their daughter's body was found in the Anaheim hills, the phone still rang. The same man, the same voice, calling, breathing, mocking. It was as if he knew, as if he wanted to make sure that even in death, Dorothy's presence would not fade into memory.
Vera, her mother, became the main target. The voice would say things like, "Are you alone now? Did you miss me?" Or, the most chilling of all, "I killed Dorothy." He would call late at night, when the house was dark and the world outside was quiet. He would call in the mornings, when Vera stood in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter. And no matter when the phone rang, dread fueled the house before she even lifted the receiver. Elise traced the calls, but the technology of the time was limited. By the time the lines were tracked, the caller had already hung up. He knew exactly how long to stay on the line. Just long enough to wound, never long enough to be caught. For 4 years, he continued. 4 years of torment after Dorothy had already been silenced. And then, One day in 1984, he simply stopped. Just like that. The calls ended. Who was he? Some investigators believed he was a man Dorothy had once known casually, someone who had developed an unhealthy fixation. Others believed he was a stranger, someone who had seen her only once, perhaps at work, and built a fantasy obsession that grew into something darker. But without proof, without a name, a fingerprint, a slip of the tongue, he remained nothing more than a phantom on the telephone line.
For Dorothy's parents, the years blurred into one another. Jacob passed away in 1994. Vera lived until 2002, carrying with her the memory of every call, every sleepless night, every unanswered question. They never knew who killed their daughter, never knew whose laughter echoed down the wires, never saw justice. Today, Dorothy Jane Scott's story endures as one of California's most chilling unsolved murders. A woman targeted by an unseen presence. A family tormented not just by her disappearance, but by the voice of the man who took her. A reminder that evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, on the other end of a ringing phone. Thank you for joining on this episode. If you found this story chilling, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support ensures that the names of the lost are never forgotten. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your phones close, and your instincts sharper than ever.